Welcome. Lesson 2.3, Carbon and Macromolecules. Remember, this is a video, so play, pause, repeat, rewind as many times as you need to understand the content and get everything in your notebook. First, let's go ahead and start with our lesson question. For this lesson and series of notes, our question we are trying to answer is, how are the organic compounds that influence life different from inorganic compounds? Go ahead and pause. Make sure you get that written down. Then, we need to understand the difference between organic and inorganic to begin with. So, let's start there. We're going to start with one of our handy-dandy T-charts. Hopefully. All right, so what is organic? Organic means a compound that contains carbon, C, covalently bonded to other elements, especially other carbon or hydrogen. On the other hand, inorganic typically does not contain carbon, but it can. There's exceptions to almost every rule in life. But most inorganic compounds do not contain carbon. Organic compounds can be very large and complex, or simple, but inorganic compounds are usually very simple. They don't get very big. And then our organic compound groups include things such as carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Our inorganic compounds can be broken into groups, but some textbooks get a lot more complicated than others. Some basic groups inorganic compounds are broken into could include salts, acids, bases, and water. That's the basics of inorganic versus organic. This lesson on carbon and macromolecules is going to focus on organic compounds. So, organic is all about the study of carbon compounds. But why carbon? Well, carbon is super special because it has 4 valence electrons with moderate bonds, meaning it has 4 electrons that it can make other bonds with other atoms, with other carbons, and those carbon-carbon bonds are moderately strong. So they're strong enough to hold and keep molecules together, but they're not so strong that they can't be broken and rearranged. So, quick review of our carbon. We have our little carbon drawing right here. Its atomic number is 6, which means it has 6 protons and 6 electrons. Those 6 electrons, as we can see, the 2 on the first shell and the 4 on the outer shell, help it stay neutral. 6 positives, 6 negatives, make 0. But it's those 4 valence electrons that allow it to bond that make carbon so special for life. Carbon, we can draw kind of like this. This is a Lewis dot structure. You'll learn more about those in chemistry. But this just shows the 4 valence electrons, those outer electrons available for creating bonds. And it's these 4 electrons that make carbon so important and fascinating for life. Those 4 electrons let carbon do a lot of different things. It can create a single atom compound with a central carbon and 4 other atoms of elements on the outside. Something like this might look like methane if these were all bonded to hydrogens. Carbon can also create really long chains, incredibly long chains of carbons all bonded together with other elements and ions on these outsides to help create our large macromolecules for life. And carbon can form rings where we have double bonds between carbon atoms or single bonds, and still space for other types of atoms and elements to come and attach. So that's the basics of why carbon, but we're going to get into the actual different groups of organic. So when you're done here, pause, and then we're going to do a little wonky, and we're going to flip our notebook sideways and come back to do a graphic organizer about the macromolecules. All right, welcome back. Hopefully you can tell that my notebook is now sideways. So we're going to make ourselves a tree map about macromolecules. You'll notice I wrote up really far. Give yourself lots of space. So what are macromolecules? Well, macromolecules are what we call polymers. They're very long chains, poly meaning many, made up of different smaller monomers. So each of our different groups of macromolecules has its own very special monomer that creates it. These macromolecules are different in two ways. They're different in structure and in function. So these groups that we're going to talk about all have their own unique functions and uses in life. But how many of these groups are there? Well, if you were paying attention in our organic versus inorganic t-chart, you noticed that they were divided into 4 different groups or 4 different types. So, what are those 4 types? Those 4 types are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids, the one you guys absolutely love to be able to say. Now, each of these different types of macromolecules are made up of some different monomers. So the monomer for carbohydrates is monosaccharides, or simple sugars. Lipids, we'll come back to. They're our oddball in this category. Nucleic acids are made up of nucleotides. Proteins are made up of amino acids. Now, these ones are all pretty simple and straightforward. They have one monomer to be able to identify. Lipids are a special classification, and they actually have 2 smaller units, a glycerol and fatty acids, that come together to make their monomer unit. Now, from our monomers, what are these actually made up of? So, carbohydrates are made up of the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. All carbohydrates have these 3 elements that make them up. Lipids are made with at least carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Proteins also consist of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen to make their monomers and polymers. And nucleic acids consist of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. These are all organic molecules, macromolecules, so very large in molecular scale. And they all, you'll see, have carbon, and a lot of them, they also have hydrogen. So going back to what is a organic molecule? But what do these even do for us? So macromolecules are different in structure and function. Well, they have some different elements, so we can say that those are probably going to be built a little bit different. But function, what do they do? Well, carbohydrates are made up of monosaccharides by the elements carbon, hydrogen, oxygen to create cellular structures and energy storage, along with a lot more. Lipids are created by glycerol and fatty acids through the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen to create long-term energy storage, insulation, padding, and so much more for life. Proteins are made up of amino acids by the elements carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen to create muscle tissues, enzymes, and more. Proteins are actually the most diverse out of all of these macromolecules, but normally when we talk and think about proteins, we think of muscles. And then nucleic acids. These are made up of nucleotides through the elements carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus to create cellular data storage. Okay, but what's all that mean? What does this actually do? So, carbohydrates are made up of monosaccharides with the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen to create energy storage and cellular structures and so much more in the form of things like bread, pasta, fruits, sugars, and more, etc. Lipids are made up of glycerol and fatty acids as their monomers and the elements of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen to create long-term energy storage, insulation, padding, and more in the forms of fats, oils, waxes, steroids, and more. Proteins are made up of the monomers amino acids by the elements carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen to create muscle tissues, enzymes, and more in the forms of meats, structures in the cells and bodies, and more. And finally, nucleic acids are made up of the monomer nucleotides through the elements carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus to create cellular data storage in the forms of DNA and RNA. Make sure that you can get this to fit so that you can come back and add in any other little frame of reference notes and things you want as we learn more about these amazing macromolecules that are essential for life. Remember, it's a video. If you didn't catch it all, play, pause, rewind, and repeat as many times as you need to. I hope you enjoyed. Talk to you next time.